Temperance as strategic discipline. A balanced vision will also manifest on the strategic level, where leaders not only imagine desired ends, but also handles the means to the realization of those ends. Here, temperance can enable leaders to develop strategic persistence. The alternative is often seen in organizations where charismatic and impulsive leaders change strategy too often, based on inspiration or possibilities that success generates. As a result, strategies are never implemented consistently enough to bring long-term results. In contrast, the research of Jim Collins and Jerry Porres shows that not only leaders but also organizations need to establish a persistent culture of strategic discipline. Collins' study suggests that the differences between the case companies that failed and the ones that prevailed was the discipline in the latter case was created by organizational habits beyond the diligence and persistence of the leader. A culture of discipline is born when the organization begins recruiting self-disciplined people that are willing of going to extreme length to fulfill their responsibility. Yet, the key factor is to establish a clear strategic framework that provides both freedom and responsibility without becoming tyrannical or bureaucratic. It is beyond the scope of this chapter to provide an exhaustive list of key organizational disciplines. Yet, for my purpose, it might be useful to mention at least 4. The first is already presented. A clear framework must be based on a clear and consistently shared vision. Secondly, a culture of discipline also needs to define operational principles. What Collins identifies as package law may serve as an example. Package stated that no company can grow its revenues consistently faster than its ability to get enough of the right people to implement that growth. The third, and perhaps most obvious discipline, is the use of quality systems or routines that secure cost control and enable the organization to confront the brutal facts in all important areas. In turn, this leads to the 4th discipline, continual learning and innovation. Organizational learning also requires its own sub-disciplines, such as team learning and reflection upon mental models, but the integrating principle is, according to Peter Senge, systems thinking, which is the capacity of seeing complex and holistic relationships between events and systems. Systems thinking can therefore be seen as a component of the sound mind that temper the organization's growth and innovation. Collins has shown that undisciplined innovation may lead great companies to fail because it stretches people and systems beyond their capabilities, and lead the organization to employ short-term strategies and quick-fix solutions. For this reason, Collins actually warns against discontinuous leaps into new domains beyond the organization's core competence. Yet, the expansion and transformation of companies like Nokia and Virgin seems to suggest that discontinuous leaps sometimes may succeed. I will suggest that this dilemma of innovation parallels the ancient dilemma involving courage and temperance. Such dilemmas cannot be solved by formulas, but calls for situational discernment. Neither temperance nor courage can be used as universal recipes for decision-making, but temperance may be useful as a regulating principle that provides a process of sound-minded thinking in the course of identifying the right combination of courage and consideration in the given situation. Although systems thinking may be used as a utilitarian perspective, situational judgments also call for a moral horizon that enables moral discernment concerning moral goods. Practical wisdom will therefore include pragmatic criteria related to long-term profit, but these criteria should be subordinated to moral traditions that envisions the good life for all, including the environment. Thus, when a conflict between ethics and profit arises, the temperate leader would choose ethics over profit and continue to search for moral and ecologically sustainable strategies. This is obviously important, since we live in a consumer society which seems to destroy the habitat of future generations. Temperance, role modeling, and interpersonal leadership. The perhaps most basic component of leadership is leadership by example, or what Bernard Bass calls ideal influence. Here, moral self-control and organizational leadership merge. Leaders who are capable of demonstrating temperance in the stewardship of resources, desires, and relations may inspire others to follow, so that the organization develops a culture of moderation. Charles Handy points out that there is a close connection between the leader's doctrine of enough, or the lack thereof, and the organization's incentive system. He suggests that what the top does today, the middle imitates tomorrow, and the bottom aspires to someday. Leaders then must decide on what kind of culture they want to model, a culture of greed or a culture of moderation. However, as I have tried to demonstrate elsewhere, role modeling does not only take place in front of, but also towards one's co-workers. People are shaped by the way they are treated, and temperance is obviously a key virtue in terms of how leaders are able to manage their feelings in interaction with co-workers. In discussions, active patience will allow the leader to understand before she or he makes herself understood by expressing her feelings. Likewise, in crisis or intense situations, self-control might help the leader to resist uncontrolled emotional outbursts. Instead, temperance allows the leader to express her or his feelings timely and make wise decisions. This form of emotional intelligence is also helpful in terms of allowing the leader to take time to assess the capability and motivation of co-workers in particular situations. Temperance, then, contributes to the judgments that are needed in situational leadership, including those choices that enable co-workers to grow. Instead of demanding instant results, temperate leaders may allow people to develop competence over time. As Ken Blanchard suggests, this is a powerful form of servant leadership that acknowledges dignity as well as the potential of the co-worker. In this way, temperance might be instrumental in terms of creating one of the most important ingredients in organizational life: trust. Temperance, change leadership, and conflict resolution. Trust is nevertheless a fragile affection and will be challenged when leaders implement change or participate in interpersonal conflicts. Here, organizational leadership might benefit from theory and research on temperance in the field of political science. Henrik Syse presents an interesting model for change leadership based on moderation, in part built on Edmund Burke's and Alexis de Tocqueville's classic criticism of the French Revolution. He points out that both Burke and Tocqueville were liberals who supported the fundamental ideas that stirred the revolution, yet they were severely critical to the way these ideas were implemented. Lack of temperance, in the sense of patience and careful consideration, led the rebels to commit several disastrous mistakes. The first flaw of the revolutionaries was that they moved too fast without enough time for critical self-reflection and consideration. One might add that they gave their adversaries and the people they were supposed to serve even less reflective time and space. Secondly, this impatience enthused an all-or-nothing attitude that disregarded everything with the old regime, including moral institutions and juridical principles. In turn, this led the rebels to commit the mistake of disregarding or lacking respect for dignity of human individuals. In the end, this led them to violate the very principles that inspired the revolution in the first place. With Syse, I would suggest that a balanced assessment of established practices and respect for the dignity of individuals should temper any form of transformational leadership, so that the cause is not used to oppress the people it is supposed to empower. Syse also advances and model of moderation in conflict, where temperance may be needed to enable leaders to hold back in the heat of battle. The following criteria for temperance or temperate use of power may also apply to an organizational context. 1. The leader should act based on legitimate authority. 2. The leaders must present good and documented reasons for his engagement. 3. Power should be used according to measures of fairness in proportion to the matter at hand. And 4. The strategy should have a fair chance of succeeding. Finally, I will add that 5. Superiors or peers should hold leaders accountable for the use of power so that it does not escalate beyond the absolutely necessary. I will suggest that the primary strategy in internal conflict situations, nevertheless, should be to seek a form of fair reconciliation or conflict resolution. Temperance will enable leaders to seek what John Galtung calls transcendent solutions first. In my view, this can be seen as a form of transformational or servant leadership, where leaders, for the sake of the common good and the dignity of individuals, seek to create win-win solutions that transcends individual interests and yet leaves the conflict parties with more than they initially wanted. Here, active patience may also depend on practical wisdom in order to distinguish between moral compromises on the one side and what one might call Machiavellian compromises on the other. The latter is based on the desire to hold one's positions of power at any cost and may degenerate into transactional bargaining based on will to power alone. Such compromises are what Georgia Jones Sørensen and James MacGregor Burns calls the perils of moderation. Yet, philosophical moderation may transcend Machiavellian compromises. Good statesmanship, according to Harry Clore, weigh and balance inevitably competing goods and interests, with the result that in one degree or another concessions are made and compromises achieved. Thus, temperate leaders seek to create a perhaps tensionful integration of common goods as they seek for win-win solutions. One might add that research shows that transformational and transactional leadership may supplement one another, even though to a certain degree tensions may exist in certain situations. In conflict, transformational leadership includes being a role model in terms of showing goodwill and, when it is appropriate, admitting and apologizing for mistakes. Yet, since opponents and co-workers also may move beyond transactional exchange to immoral use of the resources, leaders must also at times move beyond conventional transactional leadership. Elsewhere, I have suggested that leaders, under certain conditions, should use power in terms of sanctioning and firing if they face corruption and greed in their own organization. Thus, when organizational leaders face situations where mediation due to moral collapses has broken down or reconciliation is impossible, they must use legitimate forms of power to protect the organization. Yet, such actions should always be guided by the criteria that were presented above, for the sake of human dignity.